Hey, it's Isabel and I'm finally back with another video. I know it's been a while, but as you might notice, I have a bit of a different background, and that is because I moved into a new flat. And over the course of moving and everything, I kind of lost the habit of filming videos, but I hope I will get back into it. And I thought I would start out with a video where I just talk about the books that I have read since I last made a wrap-up back in, I think, January. I didn't have a lot of time for reading, but I did read a few books and also quite a few really good ones, so I'm really excited to get to talk about them. Now, for some of these books, it's been a while since I read them, but I have made notes, and hopefully I will manage to remember what I wanted to say about the books. And I think I'm just gonna go in order of the one that I've read the first to the one that I finished the most recently. So the one that I'm going to start with is The Devil and the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. Some of you might remember that this was one of my most anticipated books. I was really excited to get to it, and I'm happy to say I absolutely loved it. I gave this one 5 stars. It was such a fun read. For those of you who don't know, even though I've talked about this, I feel like a lot, this story follows a detective who has been accused of some sort of crime, and he's on a ship as a captive because he's been accused. But then strange things start happening on board that ship, and he and his acquaintances try to figure out what is going on. So let me check what I have written down about it, because apparently I finished it in mid-January and just haven't talked about it yet, which seems strange because I was so excited to get to it, and also I would definitely recommend it because I think it was really gripping. And even though it's a really long book, it really doesn't feel like it, because there is constant suspense and mystery going on. And I remember I stayed up really late because I just wanted to finish it. And I think another reason why it didn't feel like a really long book, or why I didn't mind that it was a really long book, is because I really enjoyed being with these characters and following them around while they were figuring out mysteries and having an adventure. And the mystery itself really felt like kind of a classic murder mystery, because it's kind of a big puzzle where you are given all of the pieces, and only at the very end you really find out how they all fit together. And I really find these types of stories really fun, where technically you would already know everything you need to know to figure out the mystery, but it's still not that obvious, and there were still things and connections that really surprised me. But in hindsight, I feel like I have been given all of the clues, and I think that's a really satisfying feeling to have. Though I have to say, the very end and the kind of reveals at the end felt a bit rushed, but that's already kind of the only criticism that I really have. It was still a really suspenseful story, and I felt like there was something happening at every moment. There were no like dull chapters or anything. I was always really gripped by the story. And yeah, all in all, it was exactly the book that I expected and wanted, and I'll certainly pick up whatever Stuart Turton writes next. And then next up, I read another book that is kind of an adventure story set on a ship, but this time it is non-fiction, and the book is called Icebound. And this is one of the ones where people who know my reading tastes will not be surprised that I just had to pick it up, because it's about Arctic exploration. This one only recently came out, and I think I saw it on the publisher's Instagram, and I just had to read it because it sounded so up my alley. Icebound tells the story of the Dutch navigator, I have to make sure I get it right, William Barents, who went on an Arctic exploration in, as I said, the 1590s, and his ship and his crew were frozen in the north for, I think, one winter. The book describes kind of the times, how people thought about the Arctic at that time, kind of what knowledge was around already. And yeah, it just gives a lot of context about the history and technology of the time, which I really enjoyed. And it is also, for a change, a story about people being frozen in the Arctic, but actually then caring about each other and getting out of there mostly alive again because they're just nice people. Which shouldn't be so surprising, but compared to the other kind of stories that I read about Arctic exploration, it did kind of surprise me. So if you would like to read an Arctic story that doesn't end in terror and cannibalism, maybe go for Icebound instead. And I think also, even though obviously the story follows mostly this like historic expedition, it's also a very timely book because it felt like the author really thought about what her book could bring to the narrative of Arctic expeditions. And it also talked about kind of the legacy of Arctic expeditions and also the effects that obviously we can very much feel today. And I have to say the ending really got to me because the author made the connection between Arctic exploration and climate change that we're experiencing today. And so I feel like this book was more than just another Arctic adventure story. It was also a reflection of our relationship to the Arctic and also of the fascination with the Arctic and how humans have also influenced this environment. I know that reading Arctic voyages stories might be quite niche, but in case any of you are interested in that as well, I would really highly recommend Icebound. And I think I didn't say it yet, but I also gave Icebound 5 stars. Then the next book is apparently also one about the Arctic. Do I ever read anything else? And it was Dark Matter by Michelle Paver. And this one was a reread for me. I read it last year and it was one of my favourites from last year. And as I've said, I'm kind of trying to reread more of my favourite books because I tend to really enjoy doing that. And this one was no exception. I also found it really interesting to read again because I think it's just a perfect kind of winter horror read. Because this one follows a team of young men who go to an Arctic island to, I think, conduct some weather experiments. But because of some circumstances, one of them ends up having to spend a few weeks alone on that island. And as the subtitle says, it is a ghost story, and he is confronted by this presence that is also on this island. And I think there's just something about Arctic settings that really lends itself really well to horror stories. It might be that it's completely dark during winter, or the bleak environment, or also the danger of being frozen in and the isolation that is very often present in these stories. But I just feel like in most of the Arctic stories that I've read, there's just this sense that beauty and terror are really close together. And somehow I just really enjoy that kind of atmosphere. This story is also written in a kind of diary entry style, and that really lets you get into the protagonist's head, and as a reader you kind of experience things the way that the protagonist experiences them, because you have no other option than just listening to him describe what he thinks he can see and what he thinks he's experiencing. So this story really walks the line between supernatural and paranoia, because you're not quite sure if the ghost and what is happening on the island are real or not. But in the end, it also doesn't really matter, because as you are experiencing the story from the protagonist's point of view, the terror that he feels real because he believes it to be real, if that makes any sense. And I have to say, this is one of the stories that has become even more unsettling now reading it during a lockdown than it was last year, because the protagonist talks a lot about being isolated and being alone, and he's really struggling to stay sane while he's alone on this island, and he is trying to keep up his routines to stay motivated and stay sane. So this book had surprisingly many passages that were unsettlingly relevant to today's times. But that being said, I still very much enjoyed the story like I did last year, and I'm still giving it 5 stars upon my reread. And I also feel like this is one that I want to reread again and again. It's just a certain type of story that I feel like I'm in the mood for quite often, and sometimes I also find it interesting to reread a horror story already knowing the outcome, but just to kind of try and see how we got to the point where we are at the end, and kind of see, yeah, how the story builds from the start where things are still kind of okay to the end that gets quite dark. Talking about things that are unfortunately very, very relevant today, that is also true for the next book that I've read, because I have read No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. And this is a collection of some of her speeches and essays, and this one really got to me. I was originally interested in reading this one because I think last year I saw the documentary about Greta Thunberg, and in the documentary you see some like parts and snippets of her speeches, but here they are in full. And she just has a brilliant way of putting things really simply but with a lot of force, because she formulates the messages that she wants to bring across often very simple and precise, and that is absolutely not a criticism, because that is exactly the point. It is intended as a kind of wake-up call, and it really, really impressed me. And it also made me realise that I should definitely read up more on climate change, even though I feel like I know quite a bit about it already, but I feel like there's still always more to learn about it. And I think this book is less trying to educate you about climate change, and it's more just making you aware of the problem, which is basically, yeah, what Greta Thunberg has been doing for the past few years and is continuously doing. And reading her essays made me feel sometimes a bit hopeless, and also very stressed out, but that is exactly the point. So that is absolutely, again, not a criticism. That is what is supposed to be. What I have to say though is that because it is a lot of her speeches, and she unfortunately had to make a lot of the points that she's making again and again and again in every speech that she did, things get kind of repetitive. So I'm not quite sure if the book format, so to say, worked for me. So I'm a bit torn on this one, because I find the messages that Greta Thunberg talks about really important, and I would really urge anyone who hasn't seen any of her speeches yet or read any of her speeches yet to go and read them, but I'm just not sure if this exact book format of having all of the speeches together really was the best way to present them. So I gave the book overall a 4 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, the book I read most recently is Frankissstein by Jeanette Winterson. And this is a really strange one. It is kind of a Frankenstein retelling. It's also kind of sci-fi-ish, and it has these really interesting interwoven narratives, because you at some points follow Mary Shelley as she was writing Frankenstein, and also later on, but another plot line is also a transgender doctor who has fallen in love with this kind of mad scientist who is also called Victor Stein, who is working on AI. So you have these like multiple plot lines all kind of weaving together and kind of influencing each other. It's a very, very intertextual book, which I personally enjoyed, and it's extremely clever and really beautifully written. But I always struggle a bit trying to explain to people what this book is really about, because it doesn't really have a plot in the traditional sense. It's more, I would say, kind of musings and meandering thoughts about what it means to be human, about progress and technology, about rights and injustice, and also about science and about art itself. I think I enjoyed it. I have to say, I really couldn't decide on a star rating, at least not yet. But I feel like this is one that will stay with me for a while, and I'll just have to, I don't know, let it float around and think about the ideas some more, because it really has a lot in it, and it's kind of hard to forget and really makes you think, or at least really made me think. And I very much appreciate it for that. If you're looking for a book that's a little different, certainly weird, and very intertextual, I think I would recommend this one. And those were all of the books that I have read more or less recently that I wanted to talk about today. I really hope that I will get back into making more videos again. But in the meantime, thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in my next video. Bye!